All right, Chelsea fans, welcome back to another post-Tuchel emergency podcast. As always, your host, Brandon Joe McHost. Dan this time, I've subbed Nick out, brought Dan in. We've got a new guest, Yannick's out. We brought Matt Law in, and we're just talking Tuchel exit and apparently Graham Potter walking through the door, WWE style, moments after. So much to unpack. Dan,
Money in the bank. Money in the bank match. That's what's happened here. Very American.
I tell you what, a lot of money's about to continue to go out of the bank. But Dan, real quick, before we let Matt kind of walk us through his crazy day, you were isolated up in the mountains, completely oblivious to what was going on. You get back into cell service and just your phone locks up with all of the messages.
Yeah, when you drive down a mountain and you get back into civilization from a place where you didn't have coverage and you get 100 plus WhatsApp notifications in the span of about 3 seconds, you realize something is up. And when it's from all of your Chelsea friends, you realize that something is up with your club. And in this case, it was Thomas Tuchel being gone from Chelsea. And it was not the news that I was expecting, and very much thought that he would be given more time, and I was wrong.
I'm just interested to know, because I've been trying to keep up with it on Twitter today. What would you say was the general mood? Was everyone upset, annoyed? I mean, everyone was surprised, but what was the general, or were they understanding of the decision?
There's a lot of pendulum shifting at the moment, because there have been people over the past 24 to 48 hours who mentioned that this is some of the worst football that they've seen Chelsea play for a period of time. And I think that had a very unanimous feel to it, that the attitude and mood wasn't good, but that there was a hope that Tuchel might get time, might get an opportunity to work through it. And I feel like it's a little divided in that, particularly when there's now the conflict of this individual had a part to play or a part to say within the transfers and the incoming deals or the outgoing deals that happened this summer. And now that person, 6 matches into a Premier League season, is out the door. And so I think that continuity, or that understanding of the processing of the thought, is really where that is now being filled by the narrative from whomever is informing the camp, right? Whomever, if it's someone close to Tuchel, if it's someone close to Boehly, if it's someone close to players, whomever is filling that vacuum right now is creating the narrative. And I think that's where there's maybe a bit of a break. But Brandon, who's maybe been a little bit more connected today in terms of having more cell connectivity, might have a different perspective.
I think, yeah, I think people already knew how they were going to feel before this happened, and they're just voicing that. I think there's a lot of also acceptance that it doesn't matter what we think. The decision's been made. We have to move forward. Here we go. And there's still a lot of respect and appreciation for what Tuchel brought, but definitely the way things are going this season was just a weird way. But I think the unanimous thing is definitely the timing, Matt. I think everyone, again, you have him heavily involved in 280 some million dollars worth of transfers, and then 6 days after the window, you're like, yeah, you know what? Never mind, we're good. Like we're gonna take it in a different direction. I think that was probably one of the unanimous sentiments.
I think it's interesting to take it back to the start, and you guys were actually there at the start of the problems. Last time we all saw each other in person.
Don't tie us to it, Matt. Don't tie us to the fact that the problem started and we were there.
Sorry, but this is a fact. We all last saw each other in person when we were saying goodbye in that very sort of depressed mix zone in Orlando, shall we say, when no players wanted to talk. Everyone seemed pretty down. Boehly and Egbali walked through it. And you guys were in that press conference as well with Thomas Tuchel when he exploded after the defeat to Arsenal, even though it was only a pre-season game. And I remember sitting in that press conference, and don't get me wrong, I did not think he was 6 weeks or 7 weeks or 8 weeks or however long it was ago from the sack. But it felt like a Maurizio Pochettino moment at Tottenham. It felt like an Antonio Conte moment at Chelsea. It felt like a moment. There were clearly problems. The way he reacted to that defeat, the demeanour, the general feel of some of that tour where there was a general irritation to him all the way through. It was clear there were problems. And in actual fact, he wasn't even hiding it, because he was saying it in open. He was saying that he didn't enjoy his new role. He wasn't particularly happy with the way the summer was going, both in terms of the results in pre-season, but also in terms of the way the transfer business was going. And you kind of hoped at that point that, okay, there's still a lot of this summer left. These differences will get ironed out. But in actual fact, they clearly got worse.
Well, I think there's a lot to obviously touch on and break down. It has been a hot ride to the beginning of this one. Dan put together a good framework for us so we can do. So we'll say this, right? We'll break down an eventful day where Todd Boehly's Chelsea sacked Thomas Tuchel, leaves the club after winning the Champions League, Club World Cup, and Super Cup. We won't talk about the double FA Cup, League Cup overtime penalty loss to Liverpool, because that sucked. But we're also talking about what comes next for a managerial appointment, already coming into focus, continuing Chelsea's relationship with Brighton quite heavily. So, yeah, I think, Dan, from the top, right? I mean, the rest of the world knew except you, but it all kicked off with a 9:30 a.m. in-person meeting at Cobham. And my understanding is the team didn't get back till like 3 a.m. last night. So an early turnaround.
Well, and I guess maybe, Matt, from your context, you've had a chance to witness many appointments and dismissals at Chelsea for managers over the years under the Abramovich era. Now this is the first one you get a chance to see under the Boehly era. I guess as you look back and maybe just reflect on this, it might be a little too soon, but what are the similarities and differences that you could take away from Tuchel's dismissal compared to others in the past?
Look, there's never a nice way of doing it. Let's put it that way. So there'll always be something that isn't ideal. So as you say, everyone got back at about 3 a.m. in the morning. Getting the guy in at 9:30 in the morning would seem on the outside pretty harsh. But these things just have to be, when the decision's taken, they just get done. And owners never really think about the sort of niceties around it. You know, the famous one for me was just the season after he'd won the title, Jose Mourinho in his second spell. He literally got sacked when he was about to sit down and have his Christmas dinner. It was the day at Cobham they were going to have their Christmas dinner, and he got sacked when he was going to sit down and have a Christmas dinner, which from a sort of optics and visuals perspective looked awful. But you can't let these things get in the way. So they were always going to sack him. It became very clear very early this morning that they'd chosen for whatever reason that this Wednesday they were going to sack him. I think probably they came to the decision that they had to sack him sometime last week. And obviously, I think they felt they needed, with a midweek game last week and Europe coming this week, they needed to get through the end of the transfer window, and they needed to get past the European match before they just had a chance that they felt to actually do it. Whether you agree with it or not, quite frankly, doesn't really matter. That's how they chose to do it. Look, I'm with you guys that the timing when the transfer window just shut after the big spend is the strangest thing. The decision itself, people can debate it, but the decision itself doesn't actually surprise me that much. The timing of it surprised me. I mean, look, Tuchel went in at 9:30. He met them face to face at Cobham. I'm told actually he took it quite well. There was no sort of blow up. There was no big argument. I think the famous one when there was a big argument was Andre Villas-Boas started chucking chairs around and furniture around. He went crazy when he was sacked. That's a famous one within Chelsea of, we don't want another Villas-Boas moment. And they were probably a little bit scared that they might get a Villas-Boas moment because it came as a complete shock to Tuchel. And I think they knew it was going to come as a complete shock to Tuchel. But they didn't get that. Everybody was very respectful. I'm told he took it well as can be expected anyway. And yeah, I think his thought after that was shock. And then, of course, that the players who hadn't got back until 3 would have this lie-in too. So they would have woken up in a similar way to what you were describing, to be honest, Dan, in that that they would get a flurry of messages come through. Definitely one from the club, but people will have seen on social media, people have been watching Sky Sports News. Some of them will have been awake for that, but some of them definitely won't have been, and they'll have just woken up to this flurry. They were all due in at training at 2 p.m. They obviously got there a little bit early, most of them, to congregate and chat about it. Boehly and Eghbali hung around and I believe addressed most of them, if not all of them, gave their reasoning, invited questions, told them what would happen in terms of the training while an appointment is made. Anthony Barry led that training session. He stayed on. Obviously, Tuchel's sort of coaches, as they were, they left with him. And they get on from there. And the show goes on. But it would have been a very, very odd day for those players, particularly, as you say, as we say, given they got back so late. But there's never a good time. There's literally never a good time. You could pencil a date in the calendar if you thought it was going to be a good day to try and do this kind of thing, and there'd always be something that came up. There's never going to be a good time.
Matt, just to follow on that, you mentioned that Thomas wasn't necessarily expecting this, but we've seen over 100 days that the new owners have been doing their due diligence. They've been trying to build relationships across the club with the men's team, the women's team, and the academy. And I guess from my perspective, is that maybe a lack of awareness that things weren't going well on Tuchel's part? Was it 100% just a complete shock to him that he thought he was going to have more time? Or is it a little mix of both of those?
I think there's probably a difference of opinion between Tuchel and the owners over what constituted not going well. I think Tuchel, from what I'm told, recognises that there was tension and there were sort of problems, but he saw it as a process and a debate and a way of working. I think Boehly and Eghbali and the other owners, Feliciano and the other people involved, saw it as being clearly saw it as being much more serious. When they came in, it is absolutely definite. It was not bullshit by them. It was absolutely definite that they wanted to invest in Thomas. When they first came in from the outside, and after having met him very early on, they felt that Chelsea's best asset was Thomas, and they wanted to invest in him and let him lead the way on building what they wanted to be a new culture at Chelsea, a different way of doing things. From the summer onwards, from that pre-season tour onwards, doubts just began to grow and grow and grow and get bigger and bigger over the suitability of Thomas doing that, and also whether he would really proactively involve himself in that. And it has to be said that everything he said pointed towards the fact he didn't want to be involved in the appointment of a sporting director. He didn't enjoy a new, more communicative role around the transfers. I mean, he was given a much bigger role and responsibility in transfers, but let's remember, he wasn't having to actually go out and deliver these. No one was saying, right, coach the team in the morning and this afternoon, go off and meet a chief executive to try and sign a player. He was really only having to offer as more of an opinion than he had before and be involved in a more collaborative way of doing things, i.e. being part of sort of larger WhatsApp groups where things are discussed, more communication with more people rather than just a couple of people being able to send the odd message. And he didn't like working like that. And I think the feeling became, as things wore on, that this was a man who was clearly a brilliant tactician, clearly a brilliant head coach, but he was far more suited to working in the regime that had gone and far more suited to working within the culture that Boehly and Eghbali, rightly or wrongly, and time will tell whether it's rightly or wrongly, that they want to leave behind. I hate this word, but it's the only word to describe it, a bit like Man City always preach. They want a far more holistic culture at the club where everybody talks to everybody and everybody's open to debate and questioning from everybody. And unfortunately, Tuchel just gave no sign that he was up for that.
Do you think he's a little bit of a victim of the circumstance then, since he really didn't sign up for it originally? He was very comfortable with the Marina, Petr Cech structure, and we saw, or we've read in the piece about the WhatsApp and how he was just kind of like, I can imagine he's just sitting there thumbs upping or thumbs downing like names and things, not really, clarifying things.
If you're someone who's been used to only having to really talk to two people on transfers, and I think probably not a lot of talk either. I think probably just very simple talk and the other people go off and deliver. If there's WhatsApps flying about between 6 or 7, 8 people who haven't been involved, let's face it, haven't been involved in football before, it's probably going to annoy him. It's probably going to frustrate him. But if he wanted to be a long-term part of a new era and a new culture, it's his job to learn how to work with that. And something that has been said to me today is that there were doubts over just his emotional intelligence to cope with the change in culture, because he just showed no ability to do that whatsoever. And that sounds like a really harsh criticism of it, but it's just people's working techniques. And he used to say so often that he loved the structure with Marina and Petr Cech. He loved that structure and how simple it was and how much it left him alone to pretty much work on his own. So many Chelsea managers and coaches down the years have hated being left alone. It's driven them crazy. They've wanted more communication. And yet Thomas Tuchel absolutely reveled in it. He loved it. And now everything's changed. And he is, you're right, he is a victim of circumstance, but also the new owners are a victim of circumstance because they've inherited a brilliant head coach who's absolutely not prepared to work in the way they want to work, it would seem. So both parties, you could actually argue, are victim of circumstance in that respect.
Matt, when you get into the fact that I think culture can be a very broad word, and the definition for what that means is different from organization to organization, but Todd and team clearly want to instill their own culture. It has had them dealing with multiple things on the pitch, off the pitch, the inquest into the non-footballing staff and their treatment with the marketing department this summer, a big part of that as well, kind of the overall culture. But I guess where did you observe that the biggest disconnect is in between how do we define the Todd Boehly and company vision for what culture means? Because we've seen Emma Hayes and Neil Bath get backed, seemingly come on board very quickly, and get that level of investment that it seems like they wanted to offer Tuchel, but there was just not that same meeting of the minds there and what that definition of culture was.
Yeah, I mean, look, I will find it hard on here to sort of vocalize what the culture is, and I'll be honest, I haven't actually had it spelled out to me, but the parts of the culture that I know they're very keen on to foster and that they believed were missing when they came into Chelsea was collaborative work. They felt that was completely missing at Chelsea. There was a very, very small sort of hierarchy who didn't really communicate outside themselves and didn't work collaboratively around the club. There's not a lot of middle management. There wasn't a lot of middle management at Chelsea, let's face it. And you can see some of the hires that are coming in already on the commercial side and things like that, there's going to be more middle management put in. And that again is aimed at people sharing responsibility more. Responsibility will be shared out and people will be expected to communicate beyond their departments and work collaboratively, which is something that really didn't happen, to be quite honest with you, before. Obviously, some people work together, but it wasn't sort of a culture within the club to do that. And people have got to now be open to being questioned. People have now got to be open to being asked to explain things, even if they don't think those things shouldn't need to be explained or shouldn't need to be questioned, or if they think it might be a bit of a waste of time. They've got to be open to that. They've got to be open to requests and questions and explanation. And that honestly, that wasn't there before. It's a different culture, and it's, like I say, it's going to end up, I think you're going to hear the word holistic a lot, which is a horrible word and a horrible word to try and explain, but it's going to become a lot more of that now. But to nail down at this stage what the exact culture is very difficult, because I think again, part of the reason that Tuchel is now not at the club is because they're actually building that culture now, and they're trying to figure out exactly what that culture is. But they know that in a football club, that culture has got to center so much around the head coach that they just don't feel that they can do it with a guy there who's not showing any sign of embracing that.
Another rift between ownership and manager, it sounds like, was in the transfer market and targets, who they wanted. Heard there's a lot of chopping and changing. Want this player this week, want a different player next week. It's very easy to use Ronaldo as the lightning rod, but he's the one that's constantly getting used as the example that Boehly wanted him. Tuchel said no, and then they couldn't agree on it. I don't know how big of a deal that was, or if it's just a great name to use in the pieces, but continuing in on just like it seemed like they really just didn't see eye to eye potentially on some things, or Boehly found it hard to track what it is Tuchel really wanted.
I think the problem around the Ronaldo one was because of it being Ronaldo. As soon as it became public, it was a huge thing. Anything around Ronaldo is a huge thing. So when the story broke that Boehly had spoken to Jorge Mendes about Ronaldo and had him offered to him, and clearly hadn't dismissed the opportunity at that stage, it was immediately a huge thing. So everybody latched onto it, which, if you're talking about Messi or Ronaldo or people like that, is always going to be the case. And I think what the difficulty was on Ronaldo was that not only did Tuchel say no to Ronaldo, he ended up saying no sort of 5 or 6 times. You know, the initial no wasn't necessarily accepted. And this is where we come into the difference in culture. No wasn't enough to start with for Todd Boehly and Boehly. They wanted to know why. They wanted it broken down for them. They didn't want to just be told, no, I don't want it. They wanted an explanation as to why. They wanted to break it down. They wanted to probably look at some data and figures with Thomas and have it talked through to them and have it explained that way. And they wanted to be able to give their opinion rather than it just being no. And the other thing I think that the problem was around Ronaldo is, if you remember when the Ronaldo link came up, Chelsea hadn't signed a single defender at that point. And I know for sure that there was a feeling on the Tuchel side that time was being wasted on Ronaldo, on going back and forth on Ronaldo, and on Boehly holding meetings over Ronaldo, when he felt that once the Sterling deal was done, which is one he desperately wanted and one he was delighted with, we should remember that all the energy should have been put straight into defenders at that point. And there was a big frustration around that time around the defenders, because he felt time was being wasted on defenders. And at that time, they were missing defenders. He definitely wanted De Ligt. He badly wanted De Ligt. And so there was a lot of frustration around at that point. And I think Ronaldo and his name was a bit of a lightning rod around that, to be honest with you, even though everything around Ronaldo will always get built up probably to slightly bigger than it actually was.
And then same thing with Kounde. He was just upset at the speed. I guess who's taking the blame on that one? Because I feel like I've read that Tuchel wanted him, but felt like Boehly wasn't pushing enough. Boehly felt like at the end Tuchel didn't want him enough, and they just kind of like abandoned it. To that point, it seemed quite messy on like.
Yeah, the Kounde one was very messy, and it got very confusing, to be honest with you. I mean, you'll have all seen the stories when, I can't remember where we were. We were in Orlando, I think, when, you know, it looked done to Chelsea, quite frankly. We were told there was an agreement in place. The sources from Spain were telling us that the Barcelona had given up. I think it was on a Thursday or a Friday, and it looked done. And then everything reversed over the weekend, and there was a shift in thinking. And it's now very confusing to get to the bottom of that, because I think if you spoke to Tuchel and his people, they would probably point the finger towards the owners. And I think obviously the owners would probably point the finger towards Tuchel. And it's in the fullness of time, it's now impossible to work out quite where that fell down. I mean, the damning thing about that Kounde one is it seemed that they had it all agreed, stepped back from it for whatever reason, and then actually went back to try and do it, and found that they had actually then been sort of gazumped again by Barcelona. The Kounde one for me was the messiest one of the summer, and there was clearly disagreement on Kounde. It's just impossible now to know the truth of where that disagreement quite lies.
Matt, as we kind of maybe shift from the ways that the owner, or new owners rather, and Tuchel did or didn't get along on various things, another part of that seems to be just, there's often talk of Chelsea player power. We've seen also, though, a massive squad overturned this summer in terms of incomings and outgoings. And so where did that play into this, maybe for the decision-making process? You know, we've seen some performances that haven't been so great, but that can come down to the player individually, it can come down to the system, it can come down to the manager. a whole host of things. Where was their kind of voice in this decision making process for Todd and team?
Yeah, it's look. Tuchel seemed to get himself in a mess with the squad, quite frankly. I mean, formation, team selection, right from sort of the last 6 months, not just this season, just became so muddled. And what I thought Tuchel was brilliant at when he first took over at Chelsea was his squad management. I thought his squad management was incredible. He kept everyone happy. He brought people in from the cold. He kept people ticking over. That just seemed to evaporate, and the squad management became, I felt, really quite poor and led to a lot of problems. I mean, they went into this summer with sort of 5 of their 7 attacking players wanting to leave, which just isn't a sustainable position. And sort of difficulties just arose from that. And it's just been clear that so many players haven't been happy, and some have gone and some have stayed. And that's just manifested itself more and more and more and more. And probably the worst example of it was in Zagreb on Tuesday night with Hakim Ziyech's 45 minutes, second half 45 minutes, because that looked like a player who wasn't trying to do his head coach any favours whatsoever. I don't want to be too strong with accusations because I can't speak for him, but it's been very clear for some time that a lot of players who are frustrated and unhappy at the roles they've been playing and the positions they've been asked to play, and that comes down to a lot of squad management, which is weird because, as I say, when when Tuchel first came in, I thought he was brilliant at squad management. The way he handled Kepa's situation, the way he brought in obviously Rudiger from the cold, but also the way he would just give players minutes here and there off the bench. He'd keep everyone involved, everyone happy. That just seemed to disappear. Even on the tour, we had players who, after one game, were getting sent home or sent to the under-23s. Billy Gilmore, Brozier went back with an injury, in fairness. But, it was just chaotic, the squad management. Like, this huge squad went over to the States, and then loads of them get sent back. And then players who are never really going to play for the club again are starting all the games, like Batshuayi. It was baffling at the time. When you look back now, in the fullness of knowing what's actually happened, it just seems even more confusing. Sorry, I don't know if that actually answered your question, Dan, to be quite honest with you.
Well, I think it also leads a little bit of a breadcrumb to why we saw several players who maybe Chelsea would have in a normal season looked to move on a permanent transfer, maybe had a loan deal with the option to come back because maybe there was some forethought in the dying weeks of the window that this might not be long term. And so instead of potentially giving away an asset that a future manager might want to take advantage of, that you have the flexibility to recall them, make them a part of the squad in January next season with the way that Todd and team approach those deals.
I think it also probably shows that a few players saw the writing was on the wall. Callum Hudson-Odoi, look, he could have pushed for a permanent transfer, and he actually pushed for a loan. Now, Callum Hudson-Odoi is a good example, I think, because here's a player who I don't think has performed well enough, so it's on him. But he will argue that Tuchel kept playing him out of position, which I'm now told quite a lot of the players are frustrated about, that they felt they kept getting played out of their favoured positions. And in fairness to Hudson-Odoi, he's probably one of the greatest examples of this, in that he was playing wing-back a lot. And because of playing wing-back, he wanted to leave. But he didn't want to leave on a permanent deal. He wanted to leave on loan and go and play somewhere in what he felt it was his proper position, which he's now doing at Bayer Leverkusen. I believe he started in the Champions League tonight. So he's a great example, because I think, and this is my opinion, I don't know this, I haven't spoken to him, I haven't spoken to his people about this, but I would think that he probably saw the writing on the wall and looked at it and thought, I will go and have a loan, because by the time I come back, I don't think this guy's going to be here. And if I perform well in my favoured position in my loan, that gives me another chance at Chelsea. It might also explain why the owners loaned him out rather than looking to sell him, when I think Tuchel would have been quite happy to sell him. But again, they're thinking, well, we haven't really seen this guy play where he thinks is his best position. So maybe we need to wait and see him there. As you say, Levi Colwill, why he ended up going on loan and there was no option in that for them to make it permanent, again speaks to the fact that maybe there are a few people who thought, well, that's fine while this manager is here, but there might be a difference of opinion when there's another manager here. All of that can play into it. I wonder what Romelu Lukaku's thinking Inter Milan now. I mean, look, I don't see him coming back from Inter Milan. He's made it clear he wants to be at Inter Milan. But apart from the fact he wanted to go back to Inter Milan, it's clear his big problem was with Thomas Tuchel.
We'll address that crazy timeline come this summer, but there's a lot that we're going to have to do to get through before that. So we're going to take a quick ad break. Thank you to the sponsors financially supporting the show. When we're back, we're going to talk about what's next for Chelsea. Here we go. All right, so Matt, just as quickly as Tuchel's dismissed, Chelsea look ready to appoint their new manager, Graham Potter of Brighton Hove Albion. It feels like the dismissal and the appointment were conducted with the knowledge that they could get their man, particularly as the club need to quickly turn around performances with only 16 matches between now and the World Cup. And it kind of seems obvious because Brighton were very quick to say, yes, you may speak to our manager. How surprised we are to hear from you, Todd.
Yeah, look, in fairness, I've been told that is how actually Brighton operate, that they've never seen the point if a player or a manager wants to speak to a club of actually standing in the way. And we see that with their players. They sell their players, don't they? They don't actually tie their players to lampposts or handcuff them and things and try and keep them against their will. They've got this policy that if people do want to go and speak to people, they let them. It's a very mature policy, to be fair. And maturity is not always a big thing in football, as we all know. So I would like to applaud that. But yeah, look, they will go through a process. It'll be a very quick process, and we may already be getting towards the end of that very quick process. But due diligence will be done in that I believe that Pochettino will also be spoken to, but I only see that becoming a thing if something's gone wrong with Potter. The Potter thing has moved extremely quickly, which would suggest very much the fact that he's the guy they want. He's the guy they've already pinpointed. To get permission through that quick and then get him into London on the same day for talks. You know, the players were in at training at 2:00 and Boehly and Egbali were having talks starting with Potter, you know, a few hours late after that in central London somewhere, a location I don't know where. And they got their ducks in line very, very, very quickly. And it would seem that it's his job to lose, and that's what I'm told. It's his job to lose. Something would have had to have gone wrong in those talks, or he would have to have a change of heart and decide it's not for him. I think for them to double back and look elsewhere. But like I say, they're trying to do their due diligence in that it's only right that they should talk to someone like Pochettino, who's out of work and certainly interested in the job. But yeah, everything points to Potter and everything points to Potter being done quickly. And I think they hope to probably have him in place for Fulham, take the team Fulham on Saturday. So we're speaking Wednesday night in the UK. I wouldn't be hugely surprised if we hear whether it's unofficial or official of some sort of confirmation of Potter agreeing a contract on Thursday, if not Friday.
So Matt, as you understand it, how did Potter pop up as the primary candidate, and maybe with Todd and company still being new to football but not being new to sports management in terms of large organizations, who do you understand is maybe helping guide or influence or offer input from like a footballing perspective? You know, is someone like, you know, Neil Bath or Emma Hayes, who have been around the English game, might be able to offer some additional insight, or are there other people that you understand who are helping out?
Yeah, they'll be taking advice. I've got to be quite honest. I couldn't tell you names. I don't actually know names, but I know they're taking advice. They will be taking advice. What they've done, a bit like they've worked in a very interesting way this summer, because they came in and they looked at all the agents they wanted to meet very quickly, the big agents. They pinpointed some like Mendes and Zahavi to get into very early doors, and then some other agents after that. And they pinpointed agents. They pinpointed certain of their own players they wanted to talk to. You know, they took Aspilicueta out for a meal and picked his brain on stuff. they've pinpointed various areas. They've pinpointed chief executives and owners. You know, Boehly went for that dinner with Laporta. Boehly invited all the Premier League guys for dinner. Also, what they've done within, not even necessarily at the start of having a thought of replacing Tuchel to start with, although that's obviously grown, is they've pinpointed who are the coaches we should be looking out for. And they've been asking people that, you know, if it ever comes to the day, who should we be looking at? Who are the people out there who are the hot new coaches? Who are the hot new things? Who should we be collecting data on? Who should we be forming relationships around? And I get a sense of that Graham Potter is a name that kept coming back and kept coming back and kept coming back early doors. You know, if you're looking at the hot new thing, you need to be watching this guy, Graham Potter. And this will have been before the season started, before Brighton's amazing start to the season. So they'll have been having people in their ears, and I know this for sure, I just don't know who the people are, telling them, if you ever make a change or if you're doing your due diligence and you ever want to compile a list, you need to go and look at Graham Potter. You need to look at his work. Now, they've got data, even though they don't have a football structure as such at the moment at Chelsea in terms of recruitment and data, they have their own data people. They have their own sports and Dodgers data people who have been helping them on football. I would imagine that they will have then been tasked with, and it won't have just been Potter, it's probably Pochettino as well, and probably some others they've done this on, who may already still be in jobs. But they'll have been told, go away and do some data on these guys. We want to see, we can see, we know what we're being told. We're going to watch them with our own eyes when the season starts, but we also want some data feedback on this. And their Dodgers guys and their sports data people, I'm sure, will have done that for them. And again, I can only guess that Potter scores very highly on the data in terms of results against what their expected results should be, and the recruitment and and his improvement of players and all kinds of things like that. They've obviously taken a big interest in Brighton because they've signed Mark Cucurella, and that will have fed into it. So let's say that that's the starting point. Then the season starts and Brighton just start incredibly. So obviously the interest picks up, and they will talk to more people. You know, what do you know about Potter? What do you know about Potter? Blah, 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 blah. And it will have just formed organically like that. I'm pretty sure that that's how it will have come about. But I honestly think that when they first came into football this summer, they very much decided to pinpoint, trying to speak to sort of the market leaders of every different position, whether it be agents, chief executives, other owners, players, and also forming this database for themselves on coaches. And Potter's obviously just kept coming back and back and back to them.
Well, it's not just Potter. As you mentioned, Tuchel left with his deputies, his trusted assistants. It sounds like Graham Potter would be bringing the same. Scott McLaughlin has also left. It sounds like there's a recruiting person in that kind of posse. Ooh, any idea what we would expect to see? Wasn't Antonio Kounde that had like 6 deep in his posse, and they were like trying to find room for everybody?
Look, Antonio Conte almost didn't join to start with because of the amount of people he wanted to bring over. He wanted to bring about 9 people over, and they argued it down to 6. And then after he won the title, he managed to get 1 more on the 6. You know, he always wants more. Look, it might end up more than this in the fullness of time, but there's three people that Potter would certainly come in with, and one of them is this recruitment. At Brighton, he's a recruitment analyst. At Swansea, he was head of recruitment. A guy called Kyle McCauley, who has worked very, very closely with Potter. He worked with him at Ostersund's. In fact, all of Potter's staff have worked very closed with him since Ostersund's. But I think Kyle McCauley is a very interesting name among them, just because obviously there's a gap in Chelsea's recruitment structure. There's a massive gap. There's no sporting director, and Scott McLaughlin left last week, who was the head of international scouting and pretty much worked as a chief scout. So I think Kyle McCauley or potentially coming with him, as Potter I think will demand, is very, very interesting and very, very key. Brighton's recruitment has been incredible. Now, I don't think we can credit McCauley for all of Brighton's recruitment, because they do have a director of football Potter takes a very active role in it himself, but Macaulay clearly is part of that. And I think that is very, very key for them. Along with Macaulay, there's probably space for two coaches because two coaches have sort of gone with Tuchel. Billy Reid is Potter's long-term sort of number 2 assistant. He's a sort of older Scottish coach. He was at Hamilton Academical, where he actually won Scottish Coach of the Year back in the day, 2008 or something. But he's been Potter's sort of go-to assistant again since Dostason's, and he seems to be the very experienced voice in the group. And then there's a guy who I really don't know an awful lot about called Bjorn Hamburg, who seems to be a bit of a sort of analyst stroke coach who has got a very interesting background. He set up his own team when he was only 20 and was player coach of this team while also being the manager of a supermarket. And then Potter plucked him from obscurity when Potter himself was in obscurity at Östersunds, and they've worked together ever since. Now, these 3 guys are Potter's key guys. He's travelled all round with them. There might be another coach here and there who has come in with him from different places, and you never know, in time there might be another one who comes to Chelsea. But these are his guys, and these are his guys who, if he takes the Chelsea job, as we expect, will come in with him at Chelsea. And handily for Chelsea, the vacancies are there because 2 coaches have gone with Tuchel, and Scott McLaughlin left last week. So it all seems pretty handily set up for them, quite frankly. The question mark is over Anthony Barry. He is certainly staying for the short term. He took training today. Should Potter not be in place for Saturday's game, Anthony Barry, I would expect to take the team, albeit ably assisted by some other coaches. But his long-term future, we won't be quite so sure about, because there's been teams trying to take Anthony Barry from Chelsea for years now. And he's now gone through a couple of changes, and it might be a time for him to consider. But I'm just speculating there.
All right, Dan, I say last question. Where do you want to take it? Do you want to talk about Pochettino or director of football? Choose your own adventure. The fans will be mad if you choose wrong.
No, I'm choosing correctly because I know the fans. And I think the question then would be, Matt, as the kind of follow-on. So Potter comes in, his identity, his thought of football. There's obviously been a push now because Todd Boehly, while he has enjoyed at least some of the elements of being a director of football or a sporting director for Chelsea, probably doesn't want to do that full time. I guess what would that mean for the type of candidate you would then expect them to go after, and maybe from a timing perspective, how much quicker they'll move now that they know who maybe their long-term future coach is?
Yeah, I think it should help it. It should help it because they can now make their decision knowing that they've got their long-term manager. Don't get me wrong, everyone will think that it's terrible short-termism from these owners to sack Tuchel so early, and I totally understand that argument. But actually, there's a long-term plan here, and the long-term plan is to appoint someone that they feel they won't have to change for a very long time. I mean, if you look at the Dodgers, their coach has been in for 7 years and signed a new 3-year contract to take him up to 10 years. Different sport, different pressures. I get that, but they have a philosophy that their next appointment that will be for the long term, and therefore who they want to come in as sporting director, they'll want to work with them for that amount of time. Now, one sporting director might have worked with Thomas Tuchel, but it's probably not the type of sporting director that they really wanted to appoint. And a different, more holistic sporting director will probably work with someone like Graham Potter. So I would expect it to help that process. I would expect it to speed up that process. I would expect it to be a guy they feel who can sort of benefit Potter the best, and that Potter can benefit him the best. So I would suspect it would be quite a data-driven guy, not necessarily a big name. Let's face it. I know Potter's hot at the moment, but he's not a big name. So maybe we have to look for a Graham Potter style sporting director appointment too. I wouldn't know where to start with that, quite frankly. I don't have a name for you, but maybe that's going to become a clearer thing, that it's not going to be one of the big sporting director names potentially. Potentially it's more someone under the radar, but who they feel can bring out the best in Graham, and Graham can bring out the best in them. I do think it will help it, and I do think if it is Graham Potter or whoever takes over, will probably also have a slight input on that. I don't think it was that wise of Thomas to say that he didn't want it or wasn't going to have any input on that, because it's just not how these guys work.
I had to squeeze it in. Neil Bath, it sounds like, has been gone. He's been on transfer talks. He's been on visits. Todd seems to like him, empowered the shit out of him for the academy. Neil Bath, dark horse, director of football?
No, I wouldn't have thought so. And I hope this doesn't come back to bite me, and then all of a sudden he is, because I look very stupid, but I've looked stupid before. So I'm going to put my balls on the line with this. No, just because Neil Bath is the best at what he does possibly in the world. Why on earth would you change that? Like, why on earth would you change that? If you've got someone who's the best, who's the leader in class in the world at what they do, don't change it. Just empower him more and more in the role he's in. But what I would say, and what I think you make an interesting point, and what brings us back to why this has all happened today, is that Neil Bath could have a say on things that he didn't used to have a say on before within his own role, because everyone's going to be encouraged to do that now. Everyone's going to be encouraged to share best practice. Opinions are going to be taken from different places within the organisation. That may lead to Neil Bath having a bigger voice and a bigger role, but I would be very surprised if his job changed as such, because he's the best at his job in the business.
All right. Well, we're going to wrap there, Matt. I know you got other deadlines and things to take care of. We appreciate you sneaking this in on such a crazy day. Again, follow Matt on socials. Go get the Telegraph subscription so you can read all of the articles. That's where all the good stuff is. But thank you so much, Matt. Another sacking notch on the belt.
Well, I look forward to now the one when this appointment happened. We'll be back soon, I'm sure.
Absolutely. All right. More content the rest of us throughout the week. I don't even know what's coming. Tomorrow's going to be a crazy day. Until next time, Chelsea fans, you know what to do. Keep the blue flag flying high.